Hello, my name is Craig Alvin, and I'm a recording engineer and mix engineer living in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a recent transplant here from Portland, Oregon by way of Oklahoma City. So this is a new studio that I'm in the process of setting up, and we're just hanging out here at Marathon Village. The way I got into engineering and mixing, my dad had a country gospel quartet, and he was always busy making records. He made approximately 12 records over the course of 20 years, I believe. And so I was around the studio a lot. I enjoyed playing music. I'm a bass player. So I played in several bands and always ended up having to help with sound. And then just kind of picked it up along the way. I had an experience in college where I remember I walked out of history class one day and a guy came up to me and he said, "Do you know they have a Neve console here at the school?" And I was like, "What's that? What's a Neve?" So he took me into this little storage closet that has actually been built as a recording studio, but the school hadn't used it for years. And so he and I got permission and we cleaned out the storage closet and got this studio up and going. And that's where I did a lot of my first recordings. And it was a lot of fun. The very first group I ever worked with, we did a ridiculous little demo that I think we spent 2 days on, and we lucked out. The band was really good, and they sold, I think, locally in the Portland area, I think they sold about 18,000 copies of that ridiculous demo. And so after that, I just had a lot of people calling me, wanting to do recordings, demos and such. And that was about 15 years ago. So ever since then, I've been moving forward with this. I originally thought I was going to be a pastor, and that didn't work out. So I ended up in rock and roll. I think a lot of it is just having the experience, enough experience to make people comfortable so they don't have to worry about technical stuff, and that for the most part, they don't want to be bothered with it. They don't want to know what I'm doing with mics. They don't want to have to worry about, aligning tape decks or whether or not, Pro Tools is working or what sample rate we're at, or they don't want to worry about that stuff. So I try and make all that stuff as invisible as possible so that they can just concentrate on doing music. Bottom line, the things you need to know as an engineer, I think you have to have a fairly decent understanding of acoustics, of instruments, and how instruments work. Starting at the source, if you don't understand how to tune a drum kit, you're going to have a very hard time getting a good drum sound. If you don't understand how a tube amp works, then you don't really have the knowledge it takes to go get the guitar sound that's right for the song, or to help with that. Knowing basics about these things, about acoustics, certain things about electronics, that's all important. And a basic understanding of music theory helps too. You don't have to be a theory nerd, but when someone is talking to you and they want to talk about the chart, you need to know what the 4 chord is. You need to know if something is major or minor. There is a lot to know as far as just having good ear training. I think that helps. Knowing if a guitar is in tune or not, that helps. Knowing if a singer is in tune. Again, you don't have to have perfect pitch. You don't even have to have finely tuned relative pitch. I just think you have to have some knowledge of what that is. And then, your basic knowledge of microphone technique, those kinds of things. I mean, this is a fairly broad question, so what do you need to know? You kind of have to know everything. You have to be careful with letting your opinion out. It's important that you have an opinion. You're being paid to have an opinion. That's, if you didn't have an opinion and an idea of how to get this job done effectively, then you shouldn't be doing the job, honestly. And regardless of what anyone says, they have an opinion and they're trying to move forward and make things happen based on that opinion. I think that you have to be diplomatic and understand that if you're working in a situation where you're just hired as the engineer, your opinion may not matter as much as you would like it to. And so then the important thing is to find out what other people are thinking and have the skill and the professionalism to help them achieve their goals, in spite of the fact that you may not agree. But then again, there's those gigs where you work with someone who hires you specifically because they like your take on it, and they go, "Man, explore, have fun. We want to see what you do with this." And in those situations, you can kind of try out new things and have fun with it. And sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't. But your opinion is just that. It's not fact. It's just the way you like it. It's your personal taste. So just you have to keep in mind that your name is not going to be the one on the front of the record. They aren't putting your face there. You're not the one who's gonna, that they're gonna talk about on the radio. You're there to help them do a job, and you should be a professional about it, regardless of your opinion. I haven't lived in a music city, although I would say there's been excellent music in both Portland, Oregon, and Oklahoma City. Of great music scenes and great people doing music for fun and professionally. But really, it hasn't been like a music business town like Nashville is. And the way I did it was I kind of targeted friends who were talented, like uniquely talented, people who were great writers or great like multi-instrumentalists. And basically, I would just go and kind of feed them, feed their ego a little bit, and tell them, you'd be an excellent producer. And these are always, people who could do the job but had never really thought about it. And so I got several people I knew interested in producing, and they would go out and start working with artists. And then, of course, they didn't really know how to engineer, so they had to call me to get anything done. And that was one scheme I had that worked pretty darn well. And the other thing is just being well studied on it. I didn't go to school for audio, so I had to spend a lot of time, and a lot of this is before the internet was really a thing. So you didn't have a lot of websites that you can go to and learn about this stuff. So I spent a lot of time down at Powell's Books and at the library just studying and then trying things. I got permission from studio owners to come in off hours and just, mess with things, practice mixing and practice, recording drums and practice tuning drums and various other instruments, just getting them to sound good, like what worked. I remember I found an old BBC manual in a library that had miking techniques for like classical instruments, and I remember going in one night and just setting those up and trying them out to see how they sounded, and being well versed in all those things, even though I wasn't like trained proper in a school. I've actually gone and done those things and tried them and knew how they worked and understood it, so that I could offer a wide variety of technical skills to people. And that's worked out pretty well. The other thing I've done is I've avoided, as best I could, studio ownership, and chose instead to make the studio owners my friend, so that they would call me and have me come out and do work, and that has worked out fairly well too. When you're working on different genres of music, it's key that you listen to classic recordings. If you're gonna go work on a rock record, I mean, there's a big difference between a Marilyn Manson record and a Stones record, just in how they sound. If you don't know the Beatles catalog and understand those songs, then when you have an artist who is working in a similar with similar songwriting structures or has similar arrangements, then you're not going to really know how to help them get where they want to go. And it's important too that you kind of recognize what you're good at and what you're not good at. I remember I went to go do a jazz record once, and I'd been in a total rock frame of mind, and I had to go back and actually redo a bunch of the mixes because I had the drums all wrong. And I'd been training my ear to listen to all this rock stuff. And then when I went into the jazz setting, it was totally different. It's all, it's not about the kick drum at all. They don't care about it, It's all about the ride cymbal, and in rock, you don't care about the ride cymbal that much. It's like you want the snare to hit you in the gut, and it's just a totally different frame of mind. So I had to go back and rethink how I was approaching it and go listen to jazz recordings and understand that aesthetic. It's the same thing too with country music or pop music. You have to understand the history, and then you also have to understand kind of what's happening now and what people are reaching for. There's all kinds of different ways of approaching it, and when you're mixing, it's very much this way. Things right now tend to be a little in the country market. What I've heard has been fairly dry sounding compared to what they were a few years ago. So if you're going to go do a country record now, you wouldn't want to make it, like super wet, and like with lots of reverbs and delays. The interesting thing is on the rock side, like indie rock and rock, they're exploring all these new textures with crazy reverbs and delays, and really making things kind of extreme in that way. And so that's safe. It's safe to go there with them, but it's a different application. And so you kind of have to keep up on what's happening so that you are doing something that fits, and that's not considered offensive to the listener or to your client. I think atmosphere plays such a key role because it has to do with headspace. And you have to worry about your own headspace. Like, I don't like working with people who are overly negative, because they make everyone doubt, and self-doubt is kind of the enemy of good art. You kind of have to just move forward and explore, and be willing to try things even if they don't work out. It's okay to try something and fail and have it not work, but that shouldn't affect your personal value. It needs to be safe to do that. I definitely have had situations where I worked with people who were very negative. They were always trying, for whatever reason, they were always trying to find the one wrong thing and just hammer on you for it, or hammer on the singer or the drummer, and it's not good. It doesn't it doesn't really help their headspace. And so I guess there's that atmosphere as far as interpersonal relationship, but then also atmosphere as far as like a studio is concerned. It can be helpful. It just depending, like, some records, they want to go into a big high dollar studio. Everybody wants to feel pro. They want to feel like, yes, we have good assistants on hand. We've got, the best of the best, and every detail is taken care of. Other people, they like it when you are doing like a garage recording, when it's kind of scrappy, when you're kind of, you're having to make things up as you go along, and you don't have enough mics, and you're having to, tape, the microphone to a stand because nobody has any clips. People, there are bands that like that and who thrive on that. And so it is important, but you have to recognize, which kind of session it is and set up for that. And make sure that you have the right atmosphere, the right vibe to get things done. When I first walk into a room, the very first thing I'm concerned about is monitoring. I am really concerned about making sure that what I'm hearing from the monitors is something I can interpret. Now, accuracy in monitoring that is something that comes down to personal taste. To a certain extent, you need to go in and have like reference CDs that you always bring with you, and it's important to have CDs that not only sound really, really good, but also to have CDs that have flaws. Where maybe the vocal's a little too low, or the bass is a little bloated, or whatever, or maybe something's not particularly wide sounding, it's really narrow. You need to have those kinds of CDs in your collection as well, so you can check to see if it's revealing those problems. Because if you're only listening to to stuff that's perfect, stuff that's perfect, the great thing about it is that it plays back perfectly on just about anything you play it on. And so you need to have both the CDs that are great sounding and CDs that are flawed. So I always bring along recordings that I've made that I know are flawed because I'm so intimate, with those records, and I know like where the problems are. And then I bring back, bring stuff that I've done that I like. I bring stuff that other people have done that I like, and check it out to make sure that's right. I'm not afraid to, when I walk into a room, I start moving things around. If you're going to move monitors, you've got to make sure you get permission to do that. Don't just like grab the NS10s and start moving them around. You don't know. Somebody may have paid someone a lot of money to place those perfectly. So you have to get permission. But I'm not afraid to go ask for permission and start moving around until I like it. The other thing I'll do is I'll do a certain amount of temporary acoustic treatment. Maybe move some fiberglass or even packing blankets or whatever into key spots in the room to try to absorb bass, or set up panels to get different reflections. Just to, again, try and bring some excitement into the monitoring and try to make it more even, deal with any problems there might be. That's the first thing. The other thing I make sure when I walk into a room is I go and listen to the acoustics, which means, go grab a drum and hit it. Walk around the room, have someone else hit it, and move around the room until you find where it sounds good. Go sing in a room and listen to how the acoustics affect it, and check out what they have for equipment. I have particular ideas about equipment. Like I prefer transformer balance FET microphones, condenser microphones, like a U87 for room mics. That's what I'll always reach for first, over a tube mic, over a ribbon mic. I always reach for those first because I like how they sound for that. So I start looking around, and I tend to have these types of preferences for everything, I know what kinds of preamps I like for certain situations. I know what kind of compressors I like, and I start to do kind of an inventory of what they have, and figure out, okay, what's more important here? What's the top priority? I start putting that equipment in place. I always check the instruments that are there too to make sure they're functioning right. It's really important that you also check on the availability of things like drum heads. See if there's any rental houses in town in case you need more mics or pre's or EQs. I always check and make sure that everybody has strings. If you're working with guys who are like seasoned pros, you usually don't have to worry about that. But when you have a band who's walking in and they, recording isn't what they do for a living, they need someone, to go, hey, do you have this stuff? If not, we should send someone to go get it, because you don't want to have to halt a session and run, 30, 40 minutes to Guitar Center, to get, a bass string. That's ridiculous. So I try and make sure that we have those types of things and we're ready. And then you have to think about things like isolation, or how much bleed you're going to let happen between instruments. And so again, that's sort of acoustics, checking out booths, checking out, what's the situation. Are we going to use a bass amp or just, go direct? Should we have people in the control room tracking? Should they all be out in the room together? You start to consider all those factors, and create a scenario in your head that will work, depending on the style, depending on what kind of equipment and facilities you have. We're talking about technology and how it's changing the process, really. I do prefer to mix analog. I like consoles. But I think it's inevitable that the digital systems will get better, but more than that, people are figuring these things out. Like, they're figuring out how to be musical and work in the box. So I don't see any problem with that, as long as in the end it's compelling. As long as there's a song and a good performance of that song that someone can attach an emotion to and enjoy as a listener, then great. I don't really have a problem, with the gear you use to get it done. I don't care so much. What I care about is, like, at the end of the day, is there a piece of art, that is finished, and that is working for the person who created it. I think that's really all that matters. Drums are definitely something that I enjoy recording. I love drums. And I get excited about it. I'm not a drummer at all. I think maybe that's the reason why I love drums so much, is because every time I sit down at a kit and try and play, and you see me do this, it's awful. I have no coordination. I can't make them sound good when I'm trying to play them. So it's been kind of a personal thing for me to try and to just make drums sound good in the studio, because that's really all I can bring to the instrument. So when I'm approaching drums, there are so many kinds of drum sounds. You have to have a good understanding of types of drums and tuning drums, and in particular, I am a cymbal nut. I collect cymbals everywhere I go. I keep my eyes open for unique and fun cymbals. Basically because cymbals are hard to get right. I think they're the hardest part of a drum kit to get right. And in my opinion, that's still the best argument for recording analog, is that somehow analog tape just handles cymbals so beautifully. I do most of my recording into Pro Tools these days, so I don't get to use analog as much as I would like. But one thing I found that really helps is having nice, like beautiful, mellow cymbals that certain cymbals have to have a nice decay, and other ones you want them to just go away quickly. When I'm looking at a drum kit, when I walk in, the first thing I do is I'll listen to a guy play, and I'll want to hear them play the song we're recording. A lot of times a drummer will just want to pull out like their fanciest groove, which is fun, but it really is kind of irrelevant. I want to hear the song and get an idea of the sound that we need to capture. And then what I'll do is I'll start usually with the snare drum to try and find that thing. Like in my world, the way I think about it, drums is it all kind of revolves around that snare sound. Once you find the snare sound, then that kind of tells you how you should tune the toms, what kind of cymbal choices you should make, and how you should tune the kick and where you should mic it. I really concentrate on getting that snare drum tuning and tone right from the instrument. Now, as far as setting up and miking, you can put drums in a booth, and that's fun. You can put drums in a live room, that's fun. And any variants in between. There are all kinds of techniques using, multiple mics, whatever. That's all cool. But the one thing I would say that I always do every time is I make sure that when I listen to when I set up, I listen to my overheads first. I always pull up my overhead mics and make sure that they're balanced. By that, I mean I check for phase, and I physically measure from snare drum to each mic to make sure that I'm going to be in phase. And then the other thing I do is I want to make sure that it's actually in the center. So when I have those overheads wide panned, that my kick and snare are center, because if you don't do that, things tend to lean and get strange, especially if you use any compression. And then when you're blending in your close mics, they don't make as much sense. So I like things to be really solid and centered. And sometimes I'll just, if it's not sounding centered to me, I'll start rotating the mics around the kit until I find where they actually center the snare and the kick, and then I get a good balance of toms and cymbals. And I want it to sound, in the overheads, I want it to sound like we could get by with this, with the exception of the kick drum. And there's a very practical reason why. If you think about it, every other drum, the head is pointing up. But with kick drum, it's not. It's pointing out, which puts you at the null point, phase-wise. So you're not going to get enough kick from your overheads, no matter what anyone says. It's going to be very tricky at best to try and get enough kick drum from your overheads. So I try and make sure that the rest of the drum kit sounds good. The kick should be there, but not, it's not going to be as strong as you'd like. And then I go immediately to room mics, if I'm using any room mics. And that, on room mics, I try and make sure that I have a really good picture of the whole kit. I like using a spaced pair, and I tend to have compressors on them for fun that are always being messed with. So it's different every song, but I do like to mess with room mics. I try all different things. I'll move them in close, pull them far back, pull them together, way wide, sometimes one in front, one in back. I try all kinds of different setups to get the sound right for those, but whatever it is, I want to make sure that it does sound like a full kit, so that we could just use those. And because I tend to prefer wide-spaced room mics, I had to come up with a technique that I use, and that is I have a mono mic that's usually fairly close in to the kit, and it's usually a ribbon mic, and I tend to kill that with a compressor too. And then when I pull up my room mics and blend them in, there's usually a big hole in the middle because there's wide space. So I'll just blend in a little bit of that close mono ribbon mic to fill in the hole so it doesn't feel, strange or phasey. And that's how I approach it. There's really everything else, tuning or drum choices, all those things will change from song to song, but every time I always make sure that overheads are centered in phase and sound like a drum kit. My approach to tracking a lead vocal is to look at the producer and say, have fun. Because normally, I don't get involved a whole lot with it. I obviously have tracked a ton of vocals, but for the most part, if I'm not producing, and I don't usually produce, I like engineering. I don't want to sit in the producer's seat most days, so I don't get really involved with that. But I will. I'll work with a producer to get a sound. But usually it's a fairly straightforward affair in that, I will set up a few mics based on, listening to the singer. And certain singers have particular kinds of voices. So after a while you sort of get a feel for, is this person going to sound good on, on a U87? Or are they going to prefer, a C12? Or are they going to prefer, a 57 or whatever? There's all kinds of mics that you can use for that. You just get a feel for it, and by understanding the style and the singers, you can kind of guess it's going to fall somewhere in this family of microphones. And so I'll set up those microphones that are my best guess. Usually 3 or 4. I try not to go crazy and do big 12 mic shootouts because that it wears out a vocalist, and I think it's disrespectful. You should just be able to quickly know which ones are going to work and which ones aren't. So then I will set that up and have them, just go up to the mic and sing a very short segment, into each of the mics, and usually everyone in the room kind of agrees there's one that wins, for various reasons, but usually there's a clear winner, and then we move on, from there. Like we set up quickly plug in a compressor and possibly an EQ, and then get to work. I try not to be too fussy about it because singers, they wear out. Even the best vocalists, they have a window of time where they're going to give you a great performance, and it's usually very early. So if you spend a ton of time trying out, all of your favorite nerdy compressors and EQs, and trying to set up 3 microphones and, at different distances and, all that stuff, you're just going to wear the person out. So I prefer to just very quickly make a decision and go with it. You're probably not going to screw it up as long as you get in there and get a performance. That's key. If you can get a good performance out of them, then you're fine. But if you get all techie and worry about it too much, then you're going to kill the performance and the vocal's going to be bad. So that's how I approach it. And then I usually like to leave the room. I don't like being around for vocal overdubs. I like letting the producer do that. Unless I'm producing, then it's great. But again, I don't produce very often. So I would say if somebody wants to be a professional engineer, audio engineer, mix engineer, have fun with it first. Don't bet the farm and spend a ton of money on school and spend a ton of money on gear. Go have fun with it and find out if you're uniquely talented and driven enough to pull it off. The problem that we have these days is that technology has made it so that just about anybody can go down to Guitar Center and buy some equipment and say they're an engineer. So that's really the problem. There's a lot of competition. So I would say be very, very sure of yourself before you decide to do this, and then just be ready to go hungry for a while. You're gonna have to sacrifice in order to make it, and don't spend too much time complaining about it. It's your choice. If it's a lifestyle that you can hang with, awesome. Then you're gonna have a fulfilling life. But if it's not, if you're the kind of person who is not ready and willing to make those kinds of sacrifices, then it's probably not for you. And just enjoy it as a fun time on weekends with friends, sitting around with some microphones and a good song. There's nothing wrong with that. It can be enjoyed by people on all levels, and it should be. And I applaud that hobbyist, do-it-yourself mentality is great. So but yeah, definitely not if you're the kind of person who has a hard time with the idea of going hungry.